Invincible Fight Girl is so many things. It's an action-packed wrestling extravaganza with lovable characters, it's a loving, steady tribute to classic shonen anime, it's a beacon of originality at a time of rehashes, and it's also a survivor of the Cartoon Network Zaslav purge, making it one of the last examples showcasing what the studio was all about. No kidding, I've been following this show for a good 2 years before we got to see it, fearing we were on the brink of seeing it get axed like so many other promising projects that the studio sadly were. But somehow it not only survived, but managed to live up to all the hype I ever had for it. I could legitimately talk for hours about how much the show succeeds in every regard. The characters, from the super rootable but flawed hero Andy, to her two super loyal and contrasting companions Craig and Mikey, and all the different opponents Andy faces in the ring. In addition, you have just how passionate it is about the methodologies and intricacies of wrestling, to the point where even someone not at all into it like myself can't help but be engaged and filled with adrenaline. And then, there is the artwork. Just too many good things to say about it. So clean and methodical, framed small in quantity but heavy in expression and detail, the clever little shortcuts like characters sliding or flying all over the screen, the dynamic camera angles and lighting choices to emphasize the mood of the scene, and of course, just going balls to the wall in the action. But instead of merely gushing over it for minutes on end, I figured it would be way more interesting to just take you right to the source. For you see, I am grateful to have the chance to interview the man who helped bring it all together. So, ladies and gentlemen, please meet the art director of Invincible Fight Girl, David DePasquale.
Hey, how's it going?
Things are going quite well, David, and I really appreciate you taking the time to have this chat.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It is an honor. Alright, so I'm going to start with a few setup questions before I really get into the meat here.
Sure.
To start the beginning, can you name one particular moment where you became particularly engaged in animation? Like, what would you consider an inspiration in your earlier years as an artist?
Oh man, I mean, I've been drawing since, I can pick up a pencil. I've been drawing since I was like about 2 years old. I think my mom still has my first drawing I ever did. But I think, I started off as a very much a Disney kid. I used to not be able to fall asleep unless the Little Mermaid was playing in the background. But I really didn't start, kind of pursuing drawing as like a hobby even until I was, about middle school. I was always drawing, I was always just kind of messing around, but I really started with really bad Dragon Ball Z fan art in middle school. It's actually Dragon Ball Z was kind of, I think, the first show that I ever was like, you know what, I really have to draw. I had a sort of dedicated subject matter once I started watching Dragon Ball and DBZ in middle school. So that's kind of what kicked everything off, I think.
You don't say. Little Mermaid and
Mhm.
DBZ.
Yep.
So,
little Lion King thrown in there too.
what inspires you today in the animation scene, industry, and beyond?
Oh yeah, I think currently as of January 7th, 2025, I think there's quite a number of shows that I watch on the regular, and some newer shows that have come out that I think are just bomb. Like obviously Invincible Fight Girl is a favorite of mine, and of course I'm biased, but um Gentry Chow versus the Underworld I think is a phenomenal show.
Oh,
Scavenger's Reign,
Scavenger's
um
Reign, yes.
yeah, such a good show. That's one of the most beautiful shows I think
Yeah.
I've watched. It's a really just gorgeous, like from an art direction standpoint, just a really gorgeous show. Um,
Well, I've
there's
certainly
that.
said my own words about how amazing Scavenger's Reign is, so I'm clearly in good company.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you'd be hard pressed not to find somebody who like watched that show and was like, I don't think I like this. Like, I don't. It's such a good show. And then I kind of flip flop back and forth between action and comedy. So while I do watch anime and current cartoons like Scavenger's Reign and My Hero Academia and even getting into Mashal a little bit since it was on after Fight Girl um, premiered on Adult Swim. Uh, I'm also just like a huge fan of Bob's Burgers, like a lot of the sitcom-y kind of shows. Like that's a really big comfort show of mine is Bob's Burgers. I think it's just it kind of subverted the idea of what we think of as a like kind of animated family sitcom. So if I don't know what to watch, I'll usually throw that on too. So
Oh yes,
it's one of my favorite.
I know many people in these communities who adore Bob's Burgers, and it's really grown into something of its own.
Oh yeah, I think it's I mean, it's when you think about it, it it's on its surface it looks like, oh, it just follows that typical family trope of dad, mom, and three kids. But the difference between Bob's Burgers and some of the other shows, which I also like, is that everybody on Bob's Burgers likes each other. And also I'm from New Jersey, so I have a little bit of a it's like, oh, Bob's, the Belchers are from Jersey, I'm from Jersey, so there's a little bit of like you know, hometown pride in that. I think when I watch it,
Yeah,
but it's a really well written and really funny show. So I adore Bob's Burgers.
I wear hometown pride when I watch Crick of the Creek, so
There you
I
go. See?
definitely know how that feels. I I imagine you're also hyped for common side effects, considering that's also from
Yeah.
one of the
Oh
Scavengers
man.
creators.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of I was at Comic Con this year for the Fight Girl um premiere, and like they did that little like one episode sneak peek during Comic Con, and I went down there. And they also screened the first episode of Common Side Effects, and oh man, am I hyped for that show! That show is I'm so excited for that. Like
Yes, I saw both
great
shows
title,
when they were
great
streamed
title.
that night because Adult Swim
Yeah,
live streamed that panel, and it was legit one of the most hype couple hours I've had in my recent
it was
life.
really good. Yeah, Adult Swim put on a really good show this year at Comic Con. I'm glad that people have like seen it and people are hyped about it. Like I had no idea the show even existed until I saw the screening, and I was like, oh man, what is this? Like this is about to be one of my new favorites. Like again, it's like really beautifully designed, and just the concept of it is so cool.
What drew you to pursue a career in animation?
Well, kind of funny. I was always kind of an artsy kid. I was not very good in school. I was a very bad student. I was always easily distracted, and I was the kid who'd be drawing instead of paying attention. So, I loved literature. I loved English. I loved kind of the humanities side of school, but um, math and science and all those things that went to my younger sister. She's actually a rocket scientist, so she kind of got all the book smarts. And I've always kind of wanted to be in the arts. I played piano, I played trumpet, since uh, elementary school really. And I played professionally just a little bit when I was a teenager. And I was kind of trying to decide whether I wanted to do music or the visual arts. And I think really the deciding factor for me was realizing that for me music was always a hobby. Like it was something that I did to either calm myself down or make myself happy, or just to do something in my free time that was just for me. And I loved playing music, but I think if it had turned into a job, I would have lost my love for it. And um, I think that's kind of a very personal thing for me is my music. And for me, the art is I felt I was better at visual art than I was at music to begin with. But also, it's like I found myself being able to separate what I would be doing professionally versus the kind of personal work that I would do. So it was much easier for me to make that distinction. So I went to pursue the arts. I went to um, the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City for sort of general illustration, with the anticipation of maybe becoming like a children's book illustrator, or doing graphic novels, or even just kind of like advertising. And clearly that's gone. Advertising itself has gone kind of by the wayside, unfortunately. Editorial illustration too. And I've done a couple children's books now, but I kind of really wasn't sure how to even break into the animation industry. So I went for a general art degree and kind of took it from there.
All right. Well, that naturally transitions into my next question, the first one really about your career. So, your first animation job, as far as I could tell at least, was various types of design work on the 7D, created by the great Tom
Yes,
Ruger.
that's
How did
right.
it
Yeah, that was my first on staff job.
So, how did it feel to get your foot in the door through such a prolific creator, and what did you learn from the experience that shaped your whole career from there?
I mean, that was to be on a show with not just Tom, but like Alfred Jimeno and all those guys, like all those directors and
Paul Rugg, the
that whole team.
Freakazoid.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the voice acting cast, D. Bradley Baker and all them. Like it's to work with those guys, it's like that's I'm drawing characters that that these people are voicing, and I'm drawing props that these characters are using, and that was wild because they really shaped my childhood. I mean, I know the countries of the world by heart because of that group of uh that group of artists, and Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain and Freakazoid and Hysteria, all of
Oh
those
man,
shows just
Hysteria.
yeah, I mean, I could even recite some things from Hysteria still, like the Pledge of Allegiance that they butchered on that show, is something that still runs through the back of my mind, I think. But I remember it being really hysterical. No pun intended, but like just working with that group of artists and directors and stuff was wild. Like it was really a treat to work with all those folks. The show was very funny, and it was a really great first experience in the industry. So for me, it was a dream come true.
Sounds like you started your career on a really, really good note. That
Yeah, I
sounded
think
bad,
so.
but
Before that, I was doing freelance. I had done before I moved out to Los Angeles. I had gotten a freelance job on a Nick Jr. show called The Fresh Beat Band of Spies, and that was just doing like model design stuff, a little bit of prop design, like some mouth charts, turnarounds, that kind of thing. So that was really my first job, but my first on staff job was the job on the 7D, and yeah, I think it definitely my career. I think definitely started off with a bang. I was actually a prop designer. I wasn't doing much character. They eventually kind of like fed me some character work. But yeah, my first job was a prop designer on full time on that show, so it was awesome. Really, really great way to start my career.
hmm. So some assignments later, your first one at Titmouse was lead character design for the film Arlo the Alligator Boy and its subsequent series I Heart Arlo. And I think I can speak for a lot of us when I say the character designs there were really freaking memorable, towing the line between being
Thank
freaky and endearing. What kind of
thank
process
you, thank you.
what kind of thought process went into all that, and what was it like leading such a team for the first time?
It's funny because I started off. I wasn't lead when I started off. I was just a regular character designer, and I got promoted about 6 months into my stint there on the movie, and it was my first time really doing like hardcore development, like from the ground up stuff. But I can't take credit for all the designs on that because the designs for that um, movie, like I finished them off, like absolutely. I think the final look of a lot of those characters, except for Arlo, really. Um, I kind of took them all to finish, but character design and development is really kind of a group effort. I think there's a couple people that really should be credited with, at the very least helping out with a lot of those things. Like Justin Rodriguez, who's a good buddy of mine, did a bunch of stuff on Teeny Tiny Tony and some of the other characters, and Steph Rizzo, who's a brilliant board artist, that who works at Disney Feature now. She helped out with um, was it Steph Rizzo? Was it? No, it was Alicia Gibson. Excuse me, it was Alicia Gibson. Alicia Gibson actually helped out with Birdie and a couple other characters as well. Edme was one that Alicia helped out with. She was doing some board work on some of the development for Arlo. I kind of took them to finish. I think Birdie was my real like. She was the one that I really honed in on the most. I absolutely love her. I love her design still. She's one of my favorite characters I've ever designed. Um, I think when it comes down to designing those characters, like for me, I try to incorporate a lot of the things that I like. My own personal sensibilities and my own experiences in life with in designing my characters, and um the woman who plays Birdie is a singer by the name of Mary Lambert. She's got a beautiful voice, and she's a really brilliant recording artist. And um, I wanted Birdie to really kind of evoke the things. Like I wanted her to really feel like how Mary sounded. One of the things that I kind of kept comparing Birdie too is like Birdie. We never. She's a she's a bigger character. She's very strong, but she's very sensitive. Like there was a lot of care taken with that character in particular. And one of my favorite singers of all time is Mama Cass, or Cass Elliot. She was Mamas the Papas, and to me, she kind of evokes that kind of sensitive and but powerful voice that I think we wanted to give Birdie. But at the same time, I'm also super into powerlifting, and like just being in the gym in general, and with Birdie being as physically strong as she was, it was like my whole. I like wrote it on a post-it note. Like my whole mantra for Birdie was like, "What if Mama Cass was a power lifter?" That was kind of my like how I started thinking about how to design her. So, but really, I mean, the voice cast and um, just some of the fun, funky things that Ryan Kriego, the creator of Arlo, and director of the movie, and uh, some of the things that he described and to me was like it fueled the fire of how I design those characters. I mean, having a ball of hair voiced by Jonathan Van Ness is like, how do you go wrong? Like, and how do you not include the mustache that he has? Um, Sort of iconic things. But yeah, that was a really fun. That was like a really big step in my career. I think that was a really big, I think, point in my career where I really kind of leveled up, for lack of a better phrase. Um, I had a lot of fun on that production and subsequently the TV show afterwards. But I had a really great art director who really I learned a lot from him. His name is Israel Sanchez. I learned a lot from him, and um, I just had a blast on that production. It was everybody was good vibes. Like we all loved the characters. We all loved the movie. I still play the soundtrack in my house. Like it's the music that was done for that. It's so good. Like I have a I will always have a very special place in my heart for Arlo.
I think we all do too. And I'm glad you singled out Birdie because she is definitely the character I most want to hug.
Yeah, she's my favorite, like by far. Like I love all of the, it's like I love all your kids equally, but Birdie is one of my favorite characters, just period. Like I just love her. She's so well written. She's, I think she's well designed, and she's one of my favorite characters I've ever designed for sure.
All right. Well, so it's hard not to notice how many gigs you've had since that involving Titmouse, either working with them like on Fight Girl or at them like your current gig on Golden Axe. Was
Mm-hmm.
this intentional in any way? And if so, what was it about Titmouse in particular that made it stick?
I can't say it's intentional in the sense like I was looking specifically to work at Titmouse. If you know anything about the industry, it's very gig based, especially in television. Like there's you see TV and you see feature, and sometimes people stay at studios longer when you're in a feature capacity. But even that's changing a little bit. And with television, you're moving a lot from studio to studio. We're all part of the Animation Guild. Our union, and there's a reason why we have a union. There's a reason why we have certain benefits and protections offered because we go from place to place. I have worked at quite a number of studios, DreamWorks TV, Disney TV. I've done freelance for Nickelodeon and Sony. I've worked at Cartoon Network. I did freelance for Warner Brothers. I've kind of pretty much touched 90% of the studios, I think. I kind of take the jobs that sound fun to me. But my first experience at Titmouse was on Arlo, and I had no experience with them before, and I had an absolute blast. And I'm currently having an absolute blast there as well. Titmouse is really special because it's not a distribution house like Warner Brothers or Disney or even DreamWorks with Universal. Like there's no channel tied to Titmouse. They are specifically a production house. Like they do both animation up in Vancouver and some animation down in here in Burbank and Hollywood. And they're hired by these kind of major studios to do the production work on these shows. And they've done everything from Big Mouth to Motor City to Scavenger's Reign to Gentry Chow to now Golden Axe. I mean, they have such a wide portfolio of things, and they do everything from preschool all the way up to adult, and there's no one house style with Titmouse, which is something I really love.
Oh
They're
yeah,
they're
even within
very
the same
they're,
houses that that contract them. Like Kif looks
Yep.
nothing like Stugo, which both use them.
Oh, dude. Yeah, but Kif. Oh my god, Kif is such a good show. I just love that show. Is hilarious. That's like one of the kid shows that I'll watch. I love Kif.
I'm glad that
But
show's been successful.
yeah, I know. Me too. Me too. And Titmouse is like it's again. It's like it felt really special. Like there's something, and I say this meaning the most positive intent. There's something a little grungy about it. Like, and they'll say that themselves. Like, there's something a little bit like artist focused about it. Like, it's run by two artists still. Shannon and Chris, and um, I've always felt valued as an artist for my brain there, which is not something that I could say necessarily about like every place or every project I've worked on because there's different shows for different needs. I've worked on everything from preschool all the way up until adult. I worked on Central Park. I worked on, and I've worked on Stillwater. So I've worked on, literally something for every single age. And with Titmouse, there's something very particular about working for people who understand what it means to be an artist still. And they're a very rare studio that still understands that, and it clearly shows in their work. I mean, you when you hear something is animated or is being done at Titmouse, you know that there's a level of quality that comes with that. Um, like you're gonna get something good. You're not sure what you're gonna get because there's no house style with Titmouse, but you know you're gonna get something good. So when I was when I got the call to interview for Golden Axe, I was like, oh man, this is being done Titmouse. So I was like, absolutely. I was like, hell yeah, like let's go. Because I knew they'd do it right. I knew that if I was going to be art directing this show, that I would have my artistic integrity trusted and listened to, and the team that is on Golden Axe is great. We have great executive producers, Mike McMahon, who I'm sure people know from Lower Decks and Solar Opposites, Rick and Morty. Really just hilarious guy, and Joe Chandler, who most people know from American Dad, like brilliant, sitcom writer, and I'm working with some incredible people on this team, and it's just been fun. And I don't think we would be doing it the same way if it wasn't being done at Titmouse. I think the way that we're doing the show and what we're doing with the show can only be done at Titmouse. So yeah, I do love if I get to hop onto something else after this at Titmouse, I'll be more than happy to continue working there. I love it there.
What are some of the things you would do between gigs, be it personal or side projects? Is there anything else you would like to personally highlight career-wise before we get into Fight Girl?
Oh man, yeah, I'm somebody who's crazy. I need to. I I always joke that I'm like a shark. If I stop moving, I'll die. Like I need to be doing something. Like I can't. I don't know what it means to relax, which is not something that I'm. It's something I'm working on. Like that's definitely a New Year's resolution of mine. Is like learning how to relax. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I've done children's books. I actually designed 2 tarot decks in between gigs, and it kind of bled into another when I was on another gig. I designed 1 tarot deck back in 2017, and I kickstarted it, and then I found a publishing agent, and she kind of helped me sell it to a company called Hay House, who's a subsidiary of Penguin Random House, and so they basically published it on a massive scale. So seeing my stuff in Target was pretty crazy. And then they had me do a second deck, which just came out in October of last year. It's the Storyteller's Tarot. So I love designing tarot decks. I love like doing my own personal projects. Um, stuff that I do for fun is like I'll go cycle, I'll go weightlift. Those are two big huge hobbies of mine. But yeah, I always have to keep myself busy with a project. I'm kind of always trying to look for the next thing. Between the 2 tarot decks, like after that first tarot deck, I did a plush toy tiger that I kickstarted and funded just because I wanted to. I had never done a plush toy before, and I kind of wanted to, learn what went into that, and that snowballed into something wonderful. So, I did that. I'm always kind of looking for new things to do. I'm always looking for new ways to challenge my art and new ways to grow as a designer. So I'm always looking for something. I'm always looking for a new project. Usually it's something silly. I think the most success I've had outside of the industry comes when I'm just doing something I want to do, just because I feel like doing it and because it's silly, you know.
I think a lot of artists can agree with that sentiment. I mean, a lot of what you see indie people do these days is just out of the drive, out of just wanting to make something for themselves and maybe some friends.
I mean, that's my biggest advice for young artists that I usually give when somebody asks me like, "What advice would you give people?" It's always just you should just be making the things you want to make. You know, there's always going to be an audience for it. I think when you try to chase something or chase a studio or chase a project, like unless it's completely your wheelhouse, it always comes off as a little insincere. I think when you're doing things and you're designing material and you're or doing projects or experimenting with something new that ends up being something you really want to do, that's something really personal to you, then I think even if the audience can't put a name to it or explain that that's why, people feel it. I think people feel when the humanity in something comes through, like they can relate to that. So I always recommend that people, I don't care if it's fan art or whatever you want to do, just you know I think do what your heart tells you, design what your heart tells you, make art like your heart tells you to do.
Amen. Alright, so now we're getting into the real meat, the Invincible Fight Girl saga. So, how did you first get involved in Invincible Fight Girl, and what stage was the show at when you were brought on?
So it had finished the pilot. So I came on post pilot. And I was rolling off of Stillwater. And I reached out to a friend of mine who was in recruiting at Cartoon Network. Like you do that, as you're rolling a couple months before you roll off, you always kind of like put your feelers out, like, hey, if you hear anything, just give me a heads up. And um, she's been a friend of mine for a while, and I sort of like, hey,
Jesse
just keep your ear to the
Duwano?
ground. Like, yeah, Jesse, yep. Jesse changed the course of my entire career, so I have a lot of love and respect for her. Because if without her, I wouldn't have gotten Fight Girl because I wouldn't have known it existed. So um, I reached out to her and I was like, hey, if you heard anything, just let me know. Or if you think I'm good, good for something, just put me up. And she's like, have you considered art directing? And I was like, I don't know. Like usually art directors come from background. Like they don't usually come from character design. Uh, and she's like, well, just if you're interested, like, I'll keep an ear out for that too. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. So a couple weeks later, I don't think it was a couple days, I think it was a couple weeks later, I got an email from the line producer, and she was like, hey, like, we got your name, and we were wondering if you'd be interested in interviewing or doing some freelance for this and interviewing for the art director position on Fight Girl. And I was like, what is this? So they sent me the pilot, and the pilot is totally different than the show. I think that there was a level of refinement that went into the show and kind of like where it really morphed into what it became. But there was a real awesome like seed of something in that pilot, and I watched it. I was like, oh my god! I was like, if I would love to be a part of this in whatever way I possibly can. Like there was just something so cool about that pilot. Like it felt like it was about to be something really big, and I was like, oh man, like I would even like take a character design job on this show. Like this is amazing. I was like, yeah, I'm totally interested. Like, what do you need from me? And they had me do a couple like beat boards and sort of like a couple like development passes on Accountant Isle, and Justin and I had an interview, and we just kind of like nerded out for a good hour, and we were going back and forth, and I did a couple beat boards for them just to help them kind of figure out some visual language and some visual story stuff. And I kind of pitched my idea for what I was thinking for Accountant Isle. And, I showed them some of my, mood boards that I created and a couple little sketches. And kind of one thing led to another. And, they offered me the gig, and I was over the moon. And I was not expecting that because, like I said, most art directing jobs come from people who are either background designers or background painters, and I was a character designer. I had never worked as a background artist. I had done some background design, tangentially, but I had never done it on a grand scale or as a job. So it was a little intimidating, but I think I always tell people it's like right place, right time, right project, and it turned out that Fight Girl was just that for me. So it was awesome. Like very, very cool. It was really cool to kind of see in its infancy too. Like coming on post pilot but pre series, and seeing some of the development work that Fabian Mentz was doing for that on the character side of things, and sort of seeing what I could add to it and kinds of flavors I could mix in, was really cool. So
Oh yeah, it's like you saw the blueprint and you were like, oh, I could totally make this even better.
but it's like, yeah, I mean that's the thing is like that's the cool thing about like working with Justin. Like, um, he's a very rare showrunner in the sense that he knows what he wants, but he lets you play with it. And as long as it pluses the story and, you know, contributes to, the final vision of the show, like there's a level of trust that came with the entire team on Fight Girl, and it was, yeah, I mean it was something really special. You kind of felt it from the beginning. Like I remember I got I got hired in April of 22 and I started in June of 22. Um June, late May, early June, yeah. And I just remember like the 2 months leading up to me starting, I was like, oh man, like what is this gonna be? Like this just feels there was like a there was just a feeling where I was like, this is something special. Like this is gonna be something awesome. So
Oh yeah, I
it
remember
was
when you
really
first
cool.
tweeted about that in like, I don't know, like September of 22 or something, when you're just a few months
Yeah,
into
when I
your
announced it.
job. Oh my god, these you guys, this is gonna be so freaking awesome. And I remember being
Yeah,
scared when
I
I
was really
first saw
excited.
that because I thought you were gonna say it was
I was really
canceled.
Oh God, no. I mean, there was, yeah, obviously, that was during the year of the Warner Discovery merger, so that was not a fun year, like mentally, because not being sure whether or not you're going to get canceled is not. That's not a fun position to be in, regardless of what show you're on.
I can
I mean,
imagine.
you never win. Yeah, it's. I've been on stuff that was, canned, and I've worked on stuff that never saw the light of day, and it's like it's not fun. It's kind of it comes with the territory, unfortunately, but it was like this show was so special that it's not to downplay anything else that had gotten canceled that it was also special. It's just like there's something about Fight Girl that like was so special, and I we begged whatever higher power like to not like the show made it, and it did. Like the fact that it came out, dude, is I still you know I'm still grateful to this day that we survived that murder, because I think the world needed to see the show.
Oh, I agree. I think me praying to a higher power for the show to live was the first time we interacted, in fact.
Yeah,
Because I made that
that'd be
one
great.
tweet and you were like, oh, thank you for the support.
Yeah, I
And
mean that's huge. Like just seeing the public support is nuts. Like I don't think people realize how much that means, especially to you're sitting there working on this thing for a year and a half, and you just don't know how it's going to be received. So any kind of emotional or mental or physical support is hugely appreciated.
next question. How much of an influence would you say you had in developing the look of Fight Girl? And what would you say is your proudest
Um.
personal contribution in that regard?
Oh man. Yes, I had a hand in helping form the look of Fight Girl. However, I will say that most of the heavy lifting was done during the pilot. I think there was a lot of refinement that I did, and a lot of kind of like making it into a series as opposed to just a proof of concept. We kind of took the style of what was done in the pilot. There's actually a couple artists that worked on the pilot that we were able to pull on to the full series, especially in backgrounds. So it's just kind of about like refining the look and making it fully fleshed out. The characters were pretty much set. I think there was a look that Justin really liked, and a lot of the character turns were done for the pilot. So we kind of just refined those a little bit, but for the most part, those were done. So it made my job really easy because then I was able to kind of think about story and concept and sort of like how to interpret this world in this style. Then, so it was a really great first art direction job because there was a lot of heavy lifting that was already done, um, and it was all beautiful work. So I did have a hand in kind of refining it, but most of that was already done. And my proudest moment, I think, oh man, I did the final for Birdie's Unbound version. That was the final design for that. That was proud.
Ah,
That and young Aunt P. was kind of me and Justin just jamming on that, so that was fun to do. Those two designs I think are my favorite that I did in the series. There's a lot of favorite there's a lot of favorites that I have that I didn't do that there's so many fun, quirky, crazy character designs in that show. But that, and I think putting the team together that I put together, I think there's a lot of credit that goes to the folks who I had the pleasure of working with on the design. I mean, across the whole crew, of course, but I think we put together a really great design team, and I have never worked with such a dedicated group of people before. Like everybody just gave it their all and really put their own hearts into it. And I mean, I would work with any one of them again in a heartbeat. It was like I was really proud of the team we put together.
Well, my next question actually ties right into that too. How did you work with the character designer to make all the different costumes and figures consistent in style? And could you highlight a few other artists who particularly stood out as part of the collaborative process?
Oh, I mean, I think you can go through the credits, and any one of those names is somebody who sticks out as it was very much a collaborative effort. Like everybody who worked on that, from freelancers all the way down to full time, designers, like everybody put a piece of themselves into it. I think I always liken my job as an art director to being a conductor of an orchestra. I'm not the composer of the piece, but it's up to it's up to me to make sure that the piece is played properly. But I'm also not the one playing the piece. Like I'm not the one who's in the chair playing the trumpet. I'm not the one who's playing the drums or keeping tempo. I'm keeping tempo. I'm telling the orchestra how loud and soft to play. I'm telling them how fast or slow to play. I'm pushing the brass down and bringing the strings up. Or there's a lot of things that go into what I do that can be kind of compared to conducting an orchestra. And I would do drawovers, and I would Justin would do drawovers, and we would kind of try to keep things consistent, style wise. But a lot of the designs that you see, especially in character, there's a couple. Again, go through the credits and check out the folks there: Chris Satterwhite and Shanti Ritkers, Fabian Mentz. Those were our three sort of heavy hitter character designers, and all of them brought their own personal experience and their own expertise to those characters. Like, there's some really funny designs, and some of those come from boards too, like Matthew Borden and his team, and Alan Wan and his team. Sometimes the board artists will throw in some really funny things. We tried to anticipate any major characters and design them for the board team, so they don't have to think about design when they're already on a crunched story schedule. But things like RPG Cat in episode 8, I think, is one of my favorites because he's literally in 8-bit, which I love. The brick wall was really funny. I
So,
love
RPG
Rohan's
Cat and Brick
design.
Wall were both contributions of the storyboard artists, you mean?
Yes. So those were in the boards, and we kind of took it in design and fleshed them out and kind of made them animatable. But those were really funny. And then you had like a couple, like just some background characters. Like my dog is one of the wrestlers. Like he runs the newsstand in episode 2. Like that's my dog, Banjo. And you had a bunch of folks like a bunch of the background characters in episode 3 were done by Chris Satterwhite, and there was a bunch of like everybody on that character team really contributed something personal to each one of those characters. Like I always liken it to Star Wars. Like there's definitely a couple wrestlers in the back that I think people have honed in on. Like I think one of people's favorites, there's a bunny wrestler in episode 3 that kind of just walks by screen, and apparently like people have like honed in on that one in particular. Like they like that design, which is really funny. But everybody kind of designed these wrestlers like how they would, what kind of wrestlers they would want to see, which I think is what made this show really special, because it was all about, like, that's the thing about wrestling, is like it's all about individuality. So I think having the character designers be able to sort of inject themselves and their own likes and dislikes into the world, like, just pushed that narrative.
Hmm. Very fascinating, and yeah, I agree. Part of what makes the world feel so lived in is how diverse all the character designs were, and knowing that they range from all sorts of sources, the fact that you had so many different individual voices only adds to the experience.
Yeah, because I think that's wrestling. Like you have all these big time personalities, especially in the late '90s when I was watching it, like the Undertaker and Triple H and all those guys, and um, Rey Mysterio, and Rhea Ripley now, and um, like there's so many huge person John Cena. I mean, there's so many huge personalities in wrestling, and I'm a big fan of AEW too. Like again, there's kind of like a grunginess to AEW that I think, not that WWE isn't fun to watch, because it absolutely is, um, but I think there's kind of like this like grittiness that I like to AEW, where it feels like old school WW. When it was WWF, like it feels like that. How that used to feel, and just the storylines and the crazy personalities. And it's like, how do you not? It's ridiculous. Like wrestling is just live action anime, so it's just how do you not go over how do you not go over the top with it? How do you not inject weird and crazy and fun things into the background characters? Because I think the thing that you know makes Andy stand out is she's this kind of very normal girl, and she's in this world of very ridiculous. Like she herself, I think, is very ridiculous. Like I think everybody in that show is stupid, like in a good way. Everybody they kind of have their own idiosyncrasies, but I think everybody wants to be special. As a wrestler, like you want to make yourself stand out. You want to it's like being an artist. Like you want to find that hook that makes you stand out. And I think Andy was still trying to find that, throughout the first season. So all the background characters, like she kind of feels like she's walking through a world of people who have their own, like their stuff figured out already. And in reality, nobody has anything figured out. But everybody has their hook, and I think those were like you can design background characters for the show indefinitely because it's limitless. Like you could just go through and you can design a new original character, and you'll never run out of options.
So, you already answered this next question a little bit, but even outside the art department, you had a lot of really prolific people writing the show, like M.A. Larson, Ben Joseph, and of course the series creator Justin Gordon Montgomery. And then you had the episode directors like Alan Wong and Matthew Bordenave. Did you work closely with these folks at all? And if so, what would you like to say about them?
I think the closest one that I obviously I worked with Justin very closely, but the other one I worked with really close was Matt, like, and our supervising producer, Brian Newton. The kind of four of us worked really closely. Alan, of course, too, as a director, an episodic director, but I got really close with Matt on this show, and I didn't get as close as I would have liked to the writers. I think I respect what they do immensely, and they were really fun to work with when I did get to work with them. Like we'd always do script reads, which I always love. Like before we launched an episode, we would always read the script together, which I love because you pick out characters that you quote unquote voice certain characters as you're reading through the script. I was always playing Mikey, which I loved. Mikey's one of my favorite characters. So yeah. So I think with my voice, I was kind of naturally a fit for Mikey, but yeah, it was always fun to kind of like read, the brilliant writers' words. Like they were really cool because it was one of the first shows where like I could see it playing out in my head as I was reading it. Like it was so well written, and yet left enough up to the imagination of the board artist that it's like I could really see it cinematically in my head. So I mean, I as much as I would have loved to work closer with the writers, it's like their job comes so before design that I only got a little bit of overlap with them. But of course, everybody who I worked with on that show was everybody was just really happy to be there, which was awesome. So everybody's really good to work with on that show.
This one you also kind of answered with the character design question, but the show has an omnipresent sense of grit to it, in spite of its deliberately outlandish premise. What was their mythology towards making the world and its characters feel lived or lived in?
I think I am sure Justin can answer this better than I can. He had an idea of what he wanted the world to be and how he wanted it to feel, and I think that all started in the writing. So I think he's probably better to speak to that than I am. But just from a design standpoint, it's like it depended on what the environment called for. Like I think my references for Accountant Isle being things like Pallet Town and Shirakawago, which is a little village in Japan, a really beautiful village in Japan that has these gorgeous houses, um, gorgeous old houses. But Pallet Town was a really big influence on Accountant Isle for me, and that feels a little bit more lived in, or rather, it feels lived in a different kind of way than a place like Rustburn does. I think every single area that I was tasked with coming up with the concept for, it all depends on what the story called for. I think visually the show required good writing and good concept before, like, I had to know what Rumblebead was like before I really understood how to either help design it or instruct my background designers to do some visual development on it. Same thing with Rustburn. Like, Rustburn feels a bit like Final Fantasy VII was a really big influence on Rustburn, and Cowboy Bebop I had already mentioned on Twitter. Like, Bebop was a huge, especially like the Busters, like the Losers Bar. I mean, they look totally different, but I think the Losers Bar in Cowboy Bebop was like an influence on sort of how we design the exterior of the Busters, and Mars, of course, and was it Outer Heaven in Final Fantasy VII. I have all the references on my computer, and the Kowloon Walled. I mean, even just from like real life, like the Kowloon Walled City in Hong Kong was a really big influence. Um, like there's also a city currently in China called I think it's Chongqing. I don't know how to pronounce it, in Mandarin, but there's you don't know if you're on the ground floor. Like, there's streets and there's public transportation that goes through buildings, and it's so densely populated, and it's kind of built out of necessity. Like, the thing that I wanted to get out of Rustburn was like everything. It was supposed to be kind of like this, wayport for people to stop at, because it's on the edge of the water. So it was we kind of came at it from the approach of, well, this was supposed to be this little port city, but people eventually ended up just staying. So the buildings were made out of things, and they were constructed in a way that kind of just felt like they just added on what they needed to when they needed to add on to it. So it kind of all started with sort of more traditional building materials on the bottom floors, and then as you get higher up, it's things like the sides of ships and sheet metal and like even old signs and stuff. Like, they kind of ended up building things out of necessity versus building things out of like, oh, we plan to make this building 21 stories from the get-go. It's like, nope, it was supposed to be 2 stories, and then we ended up just adding on to it because more people stayed. So it was really cool to kind of do a lot of research into that and feeling like that's how you make a place feel lived in. It's like you come up with a concept, and you come up with this kind of like, well, what's the story behind this place? Like, it's not just, oh, it's a seaside town, it's a seaside city that's super dirty. It's like, no, that's not a way to approach, like, what's the story behind the place. And the story behind Rustburn is, it was this little seaside town that was supposed to be this kind of waypoint for people to stop and get provisions at before they continued on to some other place, and it ended up just being a place that people stayed at. So things were built out of necessity. Like, there's a story behind that, and you can go so much deeper. If you look at the background buildings in Rustburn, like, you could see like walkways between buildings, and there's buildings like are all weird shaped, like they're not consistent. There's no, like, everything looks like New York or everything looks like Chicago. It's like, no, like, it's very much built out of, well, oh, I just need an additional room here, so I'm just going to extend the building off to the right and hope it doesn't fall into the into the sea. Like, there's a level of storytelling that comes with each area. I mean, I think Rumbleweed was the same, where it's like, what did this town look like before the factions were formed? What was that like? What is the Rusty Rumble like? Like, this is something that happens every single month in Rustburn, so clearly there's got to be some sort of Rustburn flavor to it. But like, the Busters clearly know how to run an establishment. Like, they run a really successful bar. It's gritty, but it's not unorganized. Like, it's something that happens every single month. Like, they take pride in it. So, what's the story behind things is always my biggest question. Like, I always say Accountant Isle, like, they're a Kirkland signature, town. Like, everything is bought, nothing is new unless it has to be. Like there's no reason for them to upgrade, their houses. There's no reason for them to upgrade their technology because they don't need it. Like it's
Oh, is
not
that why
something
everyone is using like '90s computers?
Yeah, because why if you're doing just accounting on it, like what else do you need? Like it was very deliberate that they're using older technology, but technology. I mean, it's kind of like the United States military still runs on like Windows 95 or like Windows 3 or something like that. Um, there's still stuff that runs on old technology still to this day, and why upgrade if it still works? So that was very much like a talisman that we held on to for Count Dial, because there's no new buildings built unless there has to be. It's why the tower is sort of newer looking, still kind of like old, I would say 70s 80s New York style kind of building, sort of more contemporary of a building than the rest of the town. Like, and that was done on purpose. Like, it's really the only area that's paved too. Like, there's not really much roads, like paved roads on a Countless Tile, because the main road is the only road you need. Everything else is a dirt road. Like, that's all you need. You don't need to
Yeah,
pave
it's
all
like
those.
if you have a place called Accountant Isle, obviously the only real centerpiece would be the accountant office. So yeah, that
Yeah,
that
because what
logic
else is
tracks
there? Yeah,
completely.
that's it. Yeah, that's it. That's all. I mean, everybody goes to work there, and then everybody goes home. So,
I
it's
distinctly remember that shot where you have all those little stationary figures just popping in and out of the building.
yeah, it's like it's a very utilitarian town. Like there's no excess, but they don't need excess. They don't. I think that's the big thing about Accountant Dial, is like they don't want for anything. They have everything they need, and I think that's what kind of confuses people about Andy. In the town, is like, well, you have everything you need here. Why do you want something else? It becomes less of a want and more of a need at that point, and then you get into the whole philosophy of like, what does it mean to have a calling? I think that the show delves into that a lot too. I mean, I can relate to that as an artist. It's like I didn't just want to do this for a living. Like I needed to do it for a living. So
All
um,
right. You definitely had a lot to say about this, and I can tell you're really passionate about about
yeah,
really
I,
adding,
I
really giving the world an environment full of detail for the audience to really pick apart. And yeah, I think that goes a super long way in immersing us and just making it all pop out that much more.
I mean, that's what makes it feel real, right? Like that's the always thing that I'm always looking for in, take Bob's Burgers for example. Like that family feels real to me. They feel like real people, and it's not because they're perfect, and it's not because like, their family is exactly like my family, but it feels like a real family. Like there's thought behind the story. There's reasons why they do things. Like there's reasons why Tina is the way she is and why Louise is the way she is, but there's always a drive, like a core drive that a character has. Even their burger shop, like they could be charging so much more. Like $5.95 for a burger in 2025 is cheap as heck. But he's never raised the prices. Like it's not about the money for Bob. It's about the craft of making burgers. Like that's just something he's always wanted and needed to do. So there's
I'd go there at
something
least once a
really.
week if I had a burger place that served
I
5.99
know, me
five.
too. Absolutely, I love a good burger, but it's like that's the thing, is like what's the story behind Bob? Like Bob's just not a guy who just likes to make burgers. Like that's so surface level of who he is as a character. Like he's a guy who needs to do it, and he could have stayed with his dad in his dad's diner, but his dad wasn't letting him make burgers the way that he wanted to. And obviously he has a lot of trauma from his relationship with his father and the fact that his mother died when he was young, and he's kind of always been kind of on his own, and so he's a little bit more of an introvert than his wife or his kids. So like you can deep, I mean, people do it all the time on YouTube, where it's like you deep dive into a character, like even side characters like you know Teddy or Zeke. Like they all have this Mr. Fish odor. Like they all have this kind of like core of who they are, and I appreciate that show has never lost that. Like
You
that's
know,
that's
I
always part of the story.
I have this one YouTube semi mutual who does a lot of character analysis on Bob's Burgers. Johnny Tucellos, have you heard of him?
Yeah, I've actually watched his videos. I appreciate his analysis. I think that's my favorite part of my job. Is like that's part of the art direction to me. is reminding people that that's something we always have to keep in mind. I think there's one. I'll end on a note. But if you watch the first episode of Fight Girl, and you watch the scene where they're at the dining room table, like Andy and her parents, look in the background of their kitchen, and if you look over the sink, I want you to tell me what you see. You don't have to do it right now, but there's a really important little nod that we put that one of the background designers put in, and I think it really adds to the story in such an enormous way.
What would you say was your personal favorite process to work with in terms of all the different moving parts in the pipeline?
Oh, concept by far. I love doing concept and story. That's my favorite part of the gig
All right.
by a long shot. That's my favorite part in general. I love doing concept work.
What is the one scene in the series that you are the most ecstatic about how it came out, from conception and storyboard to the final?
Oh, the where she gets the perfect strike. I've watched that sequence probably about 50 times by now, and I tear up every single time. Like when Craig tells her, like, you're not stop, forget the dumb old lady move and just fight, like, now. Like, that whole sequence between that point and then when Craig goes, that was the thing. Like, that, I could watch that sequence over and over and over again and never get bored. Like, it's so good. The boarding, the directing, the special poses, the character layout that was done, the animation, like, everything in that entire is like 3 minutes of that show. Like, it is my favorite sequence. It's so cool because you just feel it. Like, everything leading up to that moment, it's just condensed into this really hyper specific and really charged sequence, and it's so good. Like, the first time I watched it, I straight up cried. Like, it's so good.
I definitely agree with that sentiment. I definitely felt the heat when that moment came up. So, what is the main thing that you think people should take away from watching IFG, either artistically or in the series' own messaging?
I think that whole speech that the Busters gave Andy in episode 2 is pretty important. I think that kind of encapsulates what the show's about, where it's like, make sure that this is what you want. Like, if you have a drive to do something, absolutely do it, but make sure it's what you want and understand what comes with undertaking that. You have a drive, you have a calling. Like, you're gonna have to sacrifice some stuff for it. You're gonna make mistakes, but you know, if it really is what you want to do, like, be prepared to put in the work, and it'll be worth it in the end.
So I think that is a good note for us to wrap on. I think that's a very good message that most artists can heavily relate to. And all of you said really drives home how incredibly special Invincible Fight Girl is, and why you should all watch it if you haven't right now. I really appreciate, David, you taking the time to speak to me about the show and all the thought that you put into it and all that you've done to build your career. And I couldn't be any more grateful for all, not just the fact that you've agreed to this interview, but also all that you and everyone else on the team did to enhance what seems like a standard action anime wrestling show into something much more passionate, layered, and lovable. Like, you knew you had something special, and you knew you had something special, and everyone in the team just went 110% to really make it special.
Yeah,
And I think that is what animation is all about delivering in the end.
I appreciate you saying that. And I appreciate you recognizing that. Like, it's all this is like, just want to do season 2, man. Like, everybody on that team just wants to do season 2. Like, help us get a season 2.
We want you to get a season 2 as well. But even if it didn't,
find out what's going on with Cutter.
But if you don't in the end, well, you certainly gave us one hell of a ride. A perfect strike, if you will.
I think so. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. So, fingers crossed. But we're very proud of what we've done, and I'm certainly proud of everybody who's on the team, and proud of myself, and proud of the show. So, I appreciate the kind words.
Yep. Good
Fun
luck.
chat with you.
Good luck to you on Golden Axe. I'm gonna stay tuned for that, and
Thank you.
anything else that any of the artists have been brought on to since. But
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
bye. Have a good night.
Have a good night.